Welcome and thank you for being here at what is the kickoff for this semester's series of Beyond the Web. We are so grateful to continue to be hosting what started now 4 years ago. This is now the fourth year of us running this fantastic series that Dr. Searls, who you'll hear from, and Joyce Searls have been spearheading. But this year, sort of building off of, we started this series with a very basic question, which was sort of starting to think about what the future of the internet might look like, but also looking back to look forward. So trying to identify where we might have gone wrong and where we might recapture some of the promise that was once at the beginning at the design. And you'll hear from Doc because he's like 10,000 years old. He was there when the internet was first thought of. But this year, our focus, we were talking all summer long in sort of preparation for this year. Our focus was on thinking about how do we deal with these increasingly commercial pressures and things like artificial intelligence and other technologies that are developing at a global scale. How might we think locally about all of these things that are happening globally? And so today, to kick us off, is our spearhead, our leader, Doc Searls. So if you will join me in a round of applause for Doc as he presents to us today. Yay!
Thank you, Zach. I was thinking, so last year our theme was AI. So we have a chance to say AI is so last year. Now our theme this time is think globally, eat here, and the point behind that, I have to move the participants on my screen here. I have a different screen than you're watching. Is that we can solve locally some problems that are global. We're here in the Center for Global and International Studies, which is what HLS is about. And what we've done with the internet is created a place that has no distance and no gravity, and we're all zero distance apart, and is very new to human experience, and all kinds of bad things have happened as well as good things. Surveillance, for example, is now ubiquitous and the rest of it, but we're also living here locally in reality. We're all breathing the same air. The inverse square law applies if you move away from somebody. And we have a chance to solve some things in reality here locally that can possibly apply globally, and also locally to other places that are nearby. So our theme here is the News Commons. That's the title of this talk, the first in our series. And let's see, did this move? It's not moving. So that is a problem. Let's see, maybe I'll have to hit it this way. Okay, it works that way. So the space bar didn't do it, but this will do it. Okay, so I've been writing this series called The News Commons on my blog. And I'm now up to actually 15. It goes up to 14 there. And some of it I'm going to talk about here. You're going to fix something?
Yes, you can keep going. Sorry.
Okay. This is one of 3 Steves that are involved here just in the room. And there's another one online, Steve Tulsky, who was here actually yesterday. He's back in California now. So that's how I know he got there. So anyway, I've been writing about this for some time, and I'm highly informed by one local guy who became an early friend here and is a very original character, Dave Askins of the B-Square Bulletin. But what he's shared with us is stuff that actually applies to everybody else who's in the room and is working in news in this area. So I have to hit this other thing. Okay. Okay, so our goal with the News Commons is to model and prove locally the way journalism could work globally. Everybody in journalism is busy with their shorts in a knot. And okay, tech is involved. It's going on all around us. So some of what we can solve here actually can work in news deserts that are around. This is not a news desert. We have a lot of news organizations here that have in some ways supplanted and replaced the local newspaper, which is still operating. We should tell the Columbia Journalism Review that it is, because they said 5 years ago it wasn't. But we can also apply them in the news deserts that are around here in other adjacent counties. So the Community Foundation convened a panel and presented research, and we also broke into groups at an event that they had called the online news summit. And I have to walk over here to read. Oh, it's I need to be on the next slide. Excuse me for that. Okay, yeah, I didn't. Oh, I guess you can see it. Oh, it's hard to read. It's too hard to read up there. But anyway, they had a challenge for the room, and I thought since it's a really giant screen, we'd all be able to read it, but it doesn't matter. But how do we solve journalistic problems? And everybody broke out into these little groups, and what they came up with were, and they wrote on these pads, these large pads you see in the lower left there, what their ideas were, and then they had a chance to vote on them afterwards. And so here was the voting. People could actually vote more than once, so it wasn't just democratic, it was a measure of passion as well. And of course the top thing was funding. That got 16 votes, or 16 little green dots. But there's a theme that runs through all of these: community, collaborating, aggregation, collaborative coalition, cultivation. And News Commons came up in there too, and Joyce, on her little group, brought up the News Commons because I'd been writing about it. We've been talking about it for some time. So we're going to stay on that theme. But the main point here is that there is an appetite among people in the news business for actual collaboration and community, which might go toward a commons. So the question is, do or could we really have a commons here? And so if you look at what we have, I would see this as kind of a jewel box. Ron is here from the Limestone Post, others here, perhaps I hope from WFHB and WFIU and the Herald Times and the IDS. And the B Square, of course, Dave's not here today, but B Square is in there. But this is a collection, but it's not a string of pearls. There's no drill hole through all of them. They are not hurting animals. Even in a newsroom like the Herald Times used to have, or that I've worked in, there's even competition within that. So how do you get collaboration along with the natural competition that comes with this? So the answer right now is not yet. We don't really have a commons. But so let's take a look at what a commons is. This is Wikipedia. It's cultural and natural resources. And resources are what we're trying to create here, accessible to all members, including natural materials and so on. And we happen to be, and Joyce and I happen to be visiting scholars at the Ostrom workshop. Eleanor Ostrom, it's her namesake, won a Nobel Prize for her work on the commons. That's her book on it, the Governing the Commons. She won the Nobel Prize in 2009, and the workshop is still very active and with us, but she gave us some rules for what makes a commons. We'll visit that at the end, but I wanted to show that this is like hometown for what a commons is and should be. So why have a news commons? And the answer is to create a rich local news environment for sharing resources. Again, a commons is about resources. How do we create the resources? What are those? So we had a situation analysis for us done by the Herald Times and by the History Center, the Monroe County History Center, a fabulous museum and resource here in town in Bloomington. And they worked together to create this amazing exhibit last summer, went on July 18th, lasted until the end of the year. I hope some of you got to see it. They had all kinds of equipment from the Herald Times. They had history going back like 150 years for all the prior publications that were involved. And they had a summary of that, which is, let's see here, the uncertain future of news. And I want to just isolate two things there. One is where they say in 2019, the Herald Times had a staff of 29, and now they only have 7. And at the same time, and they still do, by the way, I think maybe more than that. I think it was 8 the last time I looked. And they said this, which I have to walk over here to read, but it's important. So it was enterprising individuals such as Dave Askins of the B Square Bulletin and Jeremy Hogan of the Bloomingtonian have taken on themselves to kind of cover what the Herald Times no longer could and to expand outward. And there are others, that have taken up the slack there. But I'm going to focus mostly on Dave a little bit later. But if you look at what they were all doing, and what we all still do in journalism, this is the stock and trade of journalism. Down at the bottom there is one of the archival bound volumes of the Herald Times. And everything in there is one of these. It's a story. It's all about stories. We care about stories. Stories are the fundamental format of human interest. Naturally, that's what journalism wants to cover. So everywhere you go, actually, skip ahead. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to talk about stories versus facts because there are a lot more facts than there are stories. And we need facts more than stories, quite frankly, in the long run. So I'm going to visit stories first. So if you're in a newsroom anywhere, and when we used to have newsrooms, your managing editor, your managing editor or your assignment editor is asking this: what's the story? I mean, I think I was 22 when I got out of college. I got my first job at a local newspaper, and my managing editor said over and over again, what's the story? I'd come back from the police department or I'd come back from a city meeting or whatever. What's the story on what's going on? So all stories have three elements. This is something I learned on about day 2 on the job, but I want you to keep this in mind because this is like extremely important to know and nobody talks about it. So you're hearing about this probably for the first time, but it's extremely simple. What makes a story, whether it's a novel, whether it's a soap opera, whatever, are just 3 elements. The first is character. Now you have characters, you have a protagonist in a story. You could have a political party, you could have a ball club. They could be good, they could be bad. They only have to be interesting. They have to be a character or a bunch of characters that you care about and are going to make you read about them. And the character or the characters have to have a problem. There has to be a reason to turn the page. There has to be a reason to stay tuned. It's why we watch Succession. It's why we watch any of the serials that are on TV. It's why we listen to serial podcasts. It's why we even listen to podcasts at all. Why we listen to each other. We want to hear stories, right? So characters have problems. Nobody starts with happily ever after. You start with the problem. And there has to be movement. There has to be movement toward a resolution. It doesn't mean you have to have the resolution. Soap operas never get resolved. But there has to be at least movement. So if you're at the ball game and your team is up by 40 points and you've got 3 minutes left in the game, your problem is now getting out of the parking lot. Your story is getting home. So that's how stories move. So those 3 elements. So why is this guy always a story? And I don't want to dwell on this. I don't want this to be about politics. But we happen to be living at a time when there is somebody running for president who has been president, who is extraordinarily good at generating stories and being a story himself. He's all character all the time. He is nothing but character. He plays a character. It's a show. He plays this guy in the show. He characterizes everyone he fights. This is a real innovation. You know, Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Low Energy Jeb, Little Mario, right? He's always characterizing other people, and that allows him to run the story and get them to defend themselves and not be the character he's talking about, which makes it even worse for them. It's really kind of a smart move. I'm not sure he thought about it, but he's really good at it. He creates and amplifies problems as a matter of course. Like back when he was president, every single day he's tweeting something. He did something weird yesterday. He's doing something new that's weird today. It's pushing yesterday's news right off the page. And that's why he can get away with all kinds of stuff, basically, because he's creating new problems as a matter of course. And there's movement. He's stirring things up more or less all the time. And this is a really critical one. And it speaks to the global versus local as well. He knows that fake news has no limits while fact-based news does. And it's so much easier to make up stories than it is to make up facts. You can't make up facts. When you're local, you have to, here's the pothole here, there's a sidewalk that isn't working there, the tree's prying up the sidewalk, we've got the convention center happening here. You know, Monroe County, Lake Monroe is low or it's high. These are facts that we need to depend on. But in the global level, you can make up all kinds of stuff if you're running for office. It's kind of amazing that this can be done. But I want to show those because it shows the 3 aspects of what makes a story. So let's go to facts. The most important facts that happen in a community are actually around disasters. And I bring this one up because I lived in North Carolina for the better part of 20 years. That's where I went to college. That's where I worked. That's where I started businesses and much more. But I used to go up to a place called Hot Springs in western North Carolina, and I would go through this town. This town was called Marshall. The town was under mud during the recent Hurricane Helene catastrophe. And what's interesting is that the news organizations there and many people supplying facts to news organizations shut off everything else they were doing and they jumped on this. There's a bunch of radio stations owned by a company called iHeart They have like, iHeart is one of those companies that took over like lots of radio, and they took all of their stations and turned off their programming that they were going to run anyway, and just did nothing but run the same live feed of emergency information. They're still doing it. This is in Western North Carolina. There's one called WWNC, which is basically a right-wing talk station most of the time. And I've listened to it a fair amount because I'm curious about what's going on there. And they actually, when somebody calls in with fake information like, is there a bomb at Lake Lure, is the deep state, using FEMA to steal our brains or eat our cats or whatever else it was, and they shut them off right away. No, get off of here. We need real information here. So that's where facts matter most. So this guy deals in nothing but facts. This is Dave Askins of the B-Square Bulletin. And he's really only focused on city and county government. That's his beat. That's all he does. And he tries to be as fact-based as he possibly can. But in the course of that, he's also thought a lot about how journalism ought to work and what we need as resources and collective resources in the whole community. And so he has a news flow that I'm going to go into in a moment, but he wanted to vet this with Carrie Thompson, who's our mayor. That's, I think, his picture of Carrie. And she summarized his case with this simple statement: decision makers need facts. And decision makers are not only her. I mean, she needs to really know, well, what's the background on annexing out of the city, or the moving the police station, or fixing the potholes, or the one-way streets, or anything else that might concern her. She needs those facts, but so do the citizens. And in local news, you really need to get those facts. So we're all decision makers, and we need the facts. So here's his news flow, and this is a model. It's probably not the only model, but it's an interesting way of looking at it. When we tend to look at the spread of time, we tend to say past, present, future. That's kind of a common way of organizing them. He sees it as future, present, past. So you start in the future with common calendars. And calendars are the way we organize our lives. They can be used by anyone. They're a rich fodder for the town to know what's happening and a way to sketch the future. We all depend on them. They're part of our lives. But he sees a common calendar, one that we can all look at and all contribute to. And this is actually an easier thing to do than you might think. And that flows into the present, which is news. We all do it a different way. Some do it on a monthly cadence or a bi-monthly cadence or a daily cadence. But that's the daily news. And then that flows down into the past. So there's a future, present, past organization to this, which are common archives. And he has invented two of these. He did it with open source stuff, so anybody can use it, anybody can improve it. I'm one of the people that got the world to talk about open source because I was an editor of Linux Journal for 24 years. I was the editor-in-chief at the end of it. And open source is stuff we call it NEA. Nobody owns it, everybody can use it, and anyone can improve it. So that's what these things are. They're things anybody can improve. So here's the future. That's the calendar. He calls it the big calendar. And actually right in here, you see there's a little box around where we are right now, this event that's happening today. This is this week. And it actually flows from Monday off the end of the page. And at the top of there, you see the word feeds. And this is important because Dave puts no labor into this once he's created the mechanism. The mechanism sits there, the calendar feeds itself, and it feeds it from these sources. And there are a lot of them. This actually only goes up to E right here, but the CDBG Funding Citizens Advisory Committee, Bloomington Arts Events, Animal Control Commission, Economic Development Commission, Environmental Commission, Climate Action Committee. Most of these all of them have websites. Most of them are WordPress. And when you set up the website, there's a little checkbox. You can say, do you want a calendar? Do you want the calendar to feed? All the feeds are .ics, which is a standard format for calendar feeds. And there's no labor involved other than putting the calendars together at each of those sources. But Dave isn't doing that. Dave is just listening to the feeds, and they feed into the calendar. In the same way as RSS, really simple syndication, will syndicate out what you write on your blog, for example. It goes out that way. That's another standard. So here's the rest of it. It just goes on down pretty far there. There's a really large set, and he just keeps adding to it. Never mind. Should have that off. So that's the past. I mean the future rather, which is the calendars. And that's a resource. So think of that as a resource that we have. And the President's News Reporting, and I just picked the unit and the IDS, and they're covering, for example, a cultural thing. We went, Joyce and I went to and Steve, who's up there too, all went to the Lotus Festival. Now think about the calendar that the Lotus Festival had. And I actually have it in my bag. I was going to whip it out. But that calendar is in there. There wasn't even a calendar. It was a list of things that happened there. Now, those could have been in the calendar, but they can also be in the past, which I'll go into right now. So the past is archives, and we have to archive things. So he created something called Bloom Docs. And Bloom Docs, and it's at bloomdocs.org. And Dave is very simple and straightforward about making a case for anything. It's a public document repository. Anyone can upload a file. Anyone can look at the files that have already been uploaded. That's it, right? So you've got journalists, residents, elected officials, and government staff can all benefit from this. It's just simply a collection of documents. But the future vision is what matters. He said, look for it in Bloom Docs is a common answer. This is what he wants, a common answer to the question, where can I get a copy of that document? So right now you have to go to the library, you go to the History Center, you go look in the wastebasket for the Lotus Festival thing you just threw away, whatever it was. But he has a system here, which is pretty simple. Anybody can throw something into Bloom Docs if they want to put it into Bloom Docs. So these could include, by the way, police reports, press releases, meeting agendas, resolutions, whatever got discussed. That's what he's most interested in. So the other thing in the past, the other archive thing, is the Online News Chronicle. And this is actually, the photograph is mine, but this is in my blog. But Dave wrote this. He wrote this one blog post for me, where he points out that this is in the same way that every little place in America used to have a printed newspaper. Some of them actually called the Chronicle. It would chronicle things. And then you had the newspaper archives that pulled those together. But he adds this. So the Chronicle can be thought of as subjects of a community's universal timeline of events. So this is the timeline. So we're going from the future to the present to the past. The timeline flows into here. And these online chronicles could become the backbone of local news operations. And he uses operations in the plural because multiple operations can all make use of the same resource. And here's how he set it up. And it's a media wiki. Media wiki is what Wikipedia uses on when you're going to Wikipedia or you write on Wikipedia, you're using Media Wiki. It's open source. And so this just says Media Wiki's been installed, not much else has been done. But he has this set of categories here, and he has documents he's put in behind there that as his chronicle moves forward, they can flow into here. And any other news organizations can flow into there as well. So here's the outline of it, future, present, past, and here's how it might look in more graphical form. You've got a zillion calendars coming together that are useful to all of these different news organizations, and I'm sorry if I left any out or used the wrong logo, but there it is. And then it flows into archives, which could be Bloom Docs, the online chronicle, could be anything else. We can have ideas about this. And once they're there, that can enrich what goes on into the future calendar. So for example, next year, like we were at this last Lotus Festival, we wanted to remember what was going on at the prior Lotus Festivals. Who was there? Who did we see? And it would be really nice to be able to go back and as the Lotus Festival creates a new calendar, they can look at the old ones and say, we don't want to duplicate them, maybe we want to duplicate them. There are all kinds of ways that the past can inform the future here. So, and now funding, because that's what the group was interested in most on the Online News Summit, on the Local News Summit. And this is how to fund local journalism and the News Commons. There are 4 ones that I would call kind of obvious, but they're worth going into. The first is local advertising. Now, advertising, while it's a gigantic and growing business, it's really corrupt, it's full of surveillance at the global level. At the global level, advertising is really nasty and full of problems. But at the local level, it isn't necessarily. If you want to advertise the thing that's going on next week, you're the Bluebird, Hank Ruff's going to be there, you want to advertise that, there it is. And that's local advertising. And subscriptions is gigantic right now. Everybody wants a subscription. You used to blog, now you have a newsletter, and in the newsletter, if you set it up with Substack, the first thing it does is shake you down for $60 a year, right? So everybody wants a subscription. And the third thing is philanthropy. And philanthropy is something we would all like to have, especially if we're running a nonprofit. But it's kind of a one-shot or a two-shot thing. You can't depend on it forever. Even like NPR got like $500 million from Joan Kroc, and they thank her often. But that's going to run out probably. There's a finite nature to philanthropy, but it's part of it. And then there are institutional loss leaders. In retail, loss leaders are the things you sell cheap, you put out front, that attracts people in, and you're making a loss on it. IU makes a loss on the IDS. The IDS is an institutional loss leader. It doesn't make it bad, it's just the nature of what it is. And now there are three others I'd like to share with you. Excuse me. The first is a la carte. We have the internet now. A nice thing about the internet is we should be able to program anything we want on it, and it should be easy for any of us to throw some money at whatever we want to throw it at on an a la carte basis, and not have to go to just their Patreon here or something else over there, or the GoFundMe over there, and we go through some intermediary. We should just be able to say, okay, I like the Limestone Post this month, I'm going to throw a little extra money at that. This is the kind of thing we ought to be able to do. So we actually had some thoughts about that at Project VRM, which I started at the Berkman Center at Harvard when I was a fellow there in the late aughts. So starting in 2006, we came up with a whole bunch of ideas there. One of them was Emancipate, and that came up toward the end of that, like back 2009 or so. And this is from our wiki. And the idea behind Emancipate is that it should be easy for any of us to pay, anyone to pay as much as they like, however they like, whenever they like, that's the a la carte part of this, for whatever they like on their own terms. And on that last one, by the way, we have an IEEE standard we've been working on for 7 years that's ready to go, that allows us to set our terms and they agree to it. Like right now you go to a website and what the website says is please accept our use of cookies and accept our use of tracking you. It would go the other way. They would have to agree to our terms. So that's a standard that's in the works, so that came out of this as well. And at the time, this is like about 2008 or 9, when smartphones were new, and we worked with PRX. PRX also came out of the Berkman Center. The PRX came up with a public radio player, which is a list of all the public radio stations in the country, which they were busy selling their programs to, and a way to log your listening to all of them. So you pick out different ones and you listen to them. And at the end of a period of time, it could be a year, that's how long I ran it, here's what I listened to over that last year. I mean, so using that tuner on my early level iPhone. So I get 56 hours of WBUR in Boston, somewhat less of WUNC in Chapel Hill, not a whole lot, but WAMU's Bluegrass Country, a couple hours of KPCC in Southern California, one in Utah, somewhere 1 minute, somewhere 56 hours or so. But it'd be nice to have, like say, I want to give $200 to public radio this year, and I want to prorate it out to all of these different entities. And I would be able to do this with one click and say, okay, just look at how many hours I spent on these different things. And it would go to a collection society, like sound exchanges for the music business. So when you listen to Spotify or Apple Music or to an online radio station and you're listening to music, they're paying for your stream. And who do they pay? Well, it doesn't go directly to the artist. It goes to something called Sound Exchange. So we could have something similar here for local news. We could have something, we could prototype that here, again, if we get the funding for it. And then there are your ideas. So I'd like to get some of that here and to kind of summarize this. If we have a News Commons, we can prove locally, we can work globally. And I want to visit here what a commons is. And Eleanor Ostrom had 8 rules in her book about managing a commons or governing a commons, which is her term. The first of which is strong group identity and an understanding of purpose, which I think one would need to have. The rest of these you don't necessarily all have to have. I think that's the one that we really do need to have. So with Ready for Your Ideas, here's me and how to reach me if you want to. And thank you very much. So here's Isak. Oh, we have another microphone here.
If you have questions in the room or
And look on the chat.
we'll, if you can write them in the chat online.
And I'm not looking at the chat, so other people may see the
microphone here
chat.
If anybody has questions or comments in the room.
Oh, okay. Charlotte.
Doc, could you talk a little bit about the assignment of digital archiving, which is going to be quite expensive, and it's going to need a lot of maintenance. So I'm just wondering, I know that in other discussions I've been in, that's one of the main glitches. It's the archiving sustainability
Yeah.
of the news.
Well, the fortunate thing about Dave's more or less simple or simplified ideas here with Bloom Docs and the Online Chronicle is this is a fresh thing. It goes there. Once we get a local commons going, a lot of stuff flows into there. That is the archiving system. I should add, there's a slide I took out of here, but it's worth mentioning that the Internet Archive itself is very interested in this. They're interested in supporting this. I know people there really well. I spoke and gave a kind of a version of this talk, an earlier one, at a gathering they had in California in August. And so they're interested in throwing their weight behind this and making something happen. But I think overall, it's, on the one hand, to me, the biggest problem with digital archiving is what gets lost. I had articles in a magazine called Upside, completely gone. There's not a trace of it anywhere. The Internet Archive hasn't picked up on a lot of that. They're busy archiving a lot of stuff that was in print and that you can now search that wasn't there before. But like I wrote for Omni magazine back in the early 80s, and they have some of that. But it's really hard. I mean, it's kind of a tough nut. On the one hand, digital archiving kind of expands to infinity, everything you could possibly archive, but also the problems in normalizing the whole thing, and also the evanescence of it. I mean, the World Wide Web, when it started out, we thought of as a library and a directory. In fact, a URL is a directory. It was called a directory path. It's like something/something/something/something. It's folders within folders within folders. And Yahoo, when it started, was all about we're going to curate a library here of everything that's on the web. And once search engines came along and realized that, you know what, it's a haystack, and we're just going to index the entire haystack, and then you can search our search engine and find what you want that way. And now lately, with Perplexity and Gemini and some other things that are laid on top of search, it's 2 layers of abstraction away from whatever is in that directory in the first place. So you're getting answers to stuff that's in a search that's of an index that's not really a directory. And all of it's evanescent. There's stuff that I wrote and posted and still have online from the mid-90s that is still there. I have Easter eggs in it so I can search for them, that I search for a word that nobody else has in the world. And then what happens with it is that I used to find it in Google. Google doesn't see it anymore. Google is not indexing the old stuff. And I wrote a piece about this called the Worldwide Whiteboard, because essentially what's digital is a whiteboard. It's not like the hard stuff that's in a library. If you want something to last, put it on paper, frankly. So it's a tough one. It's just a tough one. Hey.
I was just wondering, is there...
I don't think your mic is on.
I was just wondering, is there a Bloom Docs, is there a repository for video and photos?
Not that I know of.
Is Bloom Docs just...
It could be. I mean, it could be, Bloom Look, it could be Bloom whatever. And the Docs itself could have a visual archive as well, I suppose. This is something we can do. I mean, that's a good question, and people say that's a good question when they don't have an answer. So look for that. It's kind of a cue. They're buying time or they don't have the answer. And I don't have an answer to that, but what I can say is that that's a doable thing. It's a doable thing. Yeah. Are there any in the chat? Anybody have an open computer looking at chat? You do, over here. Hey.
And a question.
Thank you, Doc.
I was really intrigued by the idea and the discussion about the differences between local and global interests. And I was kind of lost when you talk about the purpose of the commons, because I feel like it sounds like a archive or repository. Is it a way to connect this repository where we collect local facts, weave them into interesting stories, and have a way to scale it to be able to deliver to people who may not be relevant to the local context, that may still find relevance through the stories. So I was just curious about the future that you see and the function that you see of this comments that you're
Well, there are two angles on this. One is basically locational, okay, which is, and I hope I can get this across. It's, the internet is this global thing, but we're not all present with each other. We may be present electronically, but I can't take the food I've got here and share it with the people online, right? Sorry guys, we'd love to do that, but I can't. It looks good, you know. But we're all here. We're all breathing the same air. We're all, you know. But it's local, right? But a key part of that too is that the facts are hard. They're not soft. They tend to be hard facts, and those are useful facts. Now, for globalizing that, that's journalism. Okay, so you want to be a journalist, and you can look at, let's say we have Bloom Docs and the Online News Chronicle and lots of other local sources of information because we get more conscious about it. The Monroe County History Center could get more involved with it. The Monroe County Library could get more involved with it. You want to write a story about it, that may have relevance to people in Lawrence County or Bartholomew County or some other thing where something's happening here might be relevant there, or might be relevant in some other part of the world. Go ahead and write something. Go ahead and make a video and put it in there. But then you have a place to point back to that's not going to go away, hopefully. That's a really critical thing. We don't want links that rot. We want links that work. So I hope that answers to some degree.
Yeah, thank you. It opens up many interesting discussions and possibilities. Like, I hate to bring this up. I was thinking about whether generative AI could play a role in connecting the dots sometimes.
Yeah, it can play, yeah. Generative AI can do some wonderful things. It does great summaries of all kinds of stuff. I rather like Perplexity because it gives sources, and often you look at the sources and find, well, that's a really specious one right there. You know, it made up a number, and it's not a real number, or it's like 3 degrees or layers of abstraction away from whatever the first thing was. But I think, you know, but generative AI is a multi-edged sword, you might say. It's probably a whole arsenal, but it's really useful in some ways. But you get like cannibalization with it, where generative AI looks at what another generative AI created that was a copy of another generative AI, and it's 3 generations away from something that got made up, got hallucinated, you know. So hard to say. Joyce. It's easier.
I just want to underline something that I think was in your question, Charles, and that is that the resources of the archives and the Bloom Docs and the calendars are the shared resources that we are envisioning as the news commons. And this is a repeatable experiment that can happen in any community. And so that where we have Wikipedia for all kinds of general interest topics, we don't have a Wikipedia timeline for the convention center here in Bloomington, but we could. And then that would create a rich local news environment and resources for all types of journalists to be able to create a story about something that's currently happening today in the convention center, but know the history of it because that resource is available to anybody who wants to write a news story. So that's the idea of the resources that we're sharing are these open source archival and the calendar resources. And that everybody will then take it and do their own hot take on the news. So that's just a way to try to explain. And then this experiment here in Bloomington could actually be repeated in anywhere.
Yeah, thank you.
I should add that an awful lot of what I just talked about here comes from Joyce. So I'm her sock puppet to some degree. So are there other questions or anything coming from online? Charles, could you see a chat there in the chat if there's anything? You're not on Zoom.
Maybe Isaac has.
We have a question in the chat from Paul Carpenter. I may not be the best person to read it out.
You are right now.
Okay, Todd asked, when it comes to decision makers needing facts, I'm interested in your thoughts around the use of generative AI in news creation, particularly in the context of local news, where fewer resources are available. What might be done to prevent or navigate a world where free content that is at a lower quality level is ubiquitous because it is generated by AI, and human-created content that is at a higher level, fact-checked and well-vetted, is behind a paywall. Anyone who's looked through Apple News without a subscription is a good example of this. The quality stories are paywalled, the Gen AI text is free. How do we prevent the news comments from being filled with useless materials?
I think or hope that's Todd Carpenter, who runs NISO, the National Information Standards Organization, who knows all about this stuff and probably is better than I am at answering that question, but he asked it. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one because on the one hand, generative AI can save a lot of money and save a lot of time. As I said before, it's extraordinarily good at some things. Am I not loud enough? Okay, I'm getting this message. It's so easy to hold this like it's an ice cream cone that's going to melt and it's out here somewhere. I mean, one answer is I think AI-generated stuff should be credited as AI-generated. I'm not sure about AI-assisted. That's a different thing. I think we all can use that. It's not necessarily bad. But if it's generated by an AI, it needs to say so in some way. I don't know beyond some kind of vigilance we don't have yet that we should stay on top of this. It's polluting already. I'm wondering what do you guys think? I mean, some of you here know more about AI than I do, I assume. We have a PhD in informatics over here. We have Isak holding his hand in front of his mouth, meaning he's not saying something.
I'm a first-year PhD in informatics. I'm learning the space right now. No, but
You got to hold the mic really close. You have to almost get it inside there. It's crazy.
No, I think a lot of that is right. I have to say, not well versed in the journalism news space, but I do consume it, right? So I do agree that like a label would be helpful, right? And I think there's an interesting incentive structure here, like for people who want to read and value like human created news, like there could be some interesting business incentives on more different sort of subscription services and things like that. But I don't know, this is a good question. Anybody else?
Charles over here. He's an authority as well. I should add. He has his PhD already.
Hello. Yeah.
Teaches
Just
here.
thinking out loud here while listening to this, and so the newer version of an amazing tool is Notebook LM, and
Notebook LM is wild. Oh
right?
wow.
And I've heard that they're able to create a podcast or a dialogue that's more consumable based on, say, a piece like an article. And I'm thinking that if we have this repository, we have the facts collected, it's possible to put together some stories and make it more consumable to people depending on their taste and their interest. Then we have the source, open source, and we also have the way to market it and deliver it to people. So it seems to be a pretty interesting way of a pipeline that
Right.
you can use this information and make it interesting and relevant to people as well. Or even like make it relevant to the future, like past
Right.
and future, all these connections. hopefully can be made.
So I'm glad you brought up Notebook LM. I advise everybody here to look into Notebook LM. It's a new project by Google. It's kind of a skunkworks inside Google. Nothing that you, using Notebook LM, produce, they say at least, goes to Google itself to inform their systems. It's your information. But here's an interesting thing about it. Joyce completely freaked me out a couple of weeks ago when she took my book, The Intention Economy, fed it into Notebook LM, and then it created an 11-minute podcast of two fake people talking about my book and getting it mostly right. But it was partly wrong. It was partly because they're not understanding anything. They're summarizing it and putting it in a kind of easily digestible form. So the weird thing about that is it's kind of like if you're looking at it in terms of digestion, it's like, wow, some of this tastes really good, but it may not all be nutritive, and some of it may be poison, right? So you don't know. We're so early in whatever AI is going to become. It's just really wild. AI, like in the same way as the internet itself kind of changed everything, AI is also changing everything. And I think one of the things that is going to sort out of that is what is it that only humans can do? And one thing I've found, for example, is that I've not seen an AI yet that really gets meaning, that really knows what you're trying to mean. That we anthropomorphize it by saying, well, we train it and it understands these things and it knows these things and it speaks to you in the first person. Like, I didn't understand what you're saying, or I tried to create this, I made this picture, but it's not a human being, using the first person singular pronoun. And it's just a machine giving you an output that's easy to understand, and because it seems human-like, but it's not really human. And I think that's another way that operating locally is going to be good, because we are human here. We can't help but be human. We're dealing with other people. We know them by name, and we can agree and disagree with them. And it's a very different. It's a great laboratory for finding out what's really human and what's not, even as we use these tools. But toward the video question, I was thinking, I've read that most young people get their news from TikTok, and I've played with TikTok. I don't know how news gets through that, but maybe it does. It just shows me dancing girls and some other things it thinks I'm interested in, and I'm not, because it doesn't read me very well. But it's there. But could we use TikTok in some ways? I kind of doubt it, but I don't know. Maybe it's possible. Charlotte has her hand up. Oh, here, Joyce. Oh, Joyce did want to say something. Do you want to say it before Charlotte? No,
go ahead. He's heard me, Glenn.
I know I've heard her, but you guys haven't.
I'm going to change the topic, so you can.
Go ahead, change the
I'll point to that.
Just put the mouth right on you, because, yeah.
So when you started, you had a list of all these news sources from Bloomington, and my first question is, so what's local? And I guess I wonder if in the vision of a news kind, a local news kind could be more like building a network that allowed us to know what's going on in Owen County and in other parts of the state, because we don't have access to that. And also, we live in a state that is so strongly controlled by the Republican legislature that people just have given up locally in terms of any feeling of having a voice. And so that's one thing I'm basing that on. My daughter, who's a community organizer in Indiana. So that is, do we have to put a circle around Bloomington or Monroe County, or can we think more of connections to and a network in our state? Because we do not have good access to regional news at all.
Right.
So that's, I guess, maybe I should stop there, because I had one other thing I wanted to just mention, but I could stop and respond to that.
Just hold a second thought. There are or ought to be, and of course, Kate's working on one thing that's just fabulous. I found out from her, things are even worse than I thought in the outlying counties. There's this weird blue spot in a red state. There are a couple others, I guess Lafayette's another one, and South Bend is another one. But And there's a news desert out there. I'd love to be able to connect things. And one of the things I hope it's true, is that because because we want to do things that are based in reality. Reality is here in Bloomington. Most of what we care about is not blue or red stuff. It's stuff that matters. It's stuff, we want the conference center, if it's not just for Monroe County, maybe it's for Southern Indiana. I'd love it to be that personally. I'd like it to be called Indiana Uplands or something like that instead of Monroe Convention Center. But I think we do lots of outreach that's actually based on reality. What do we need? What do we do with snow? What do we do with waste? What do we do with other things that are just real stuff? That's one of the ways that Western North Carolina is really interesting right now, because people are finding out, what does FEMA really do? What do the National Guard do when they come in here? How do we interact with that? Where do we find the stuff that we lost? How do we all get together on insurance companies, whatever else it is? And it's not a blue-red thing. It's just a thing that people need to deal with. So I don't think we need to have a disaster to answer that question. But I do know there are organizations, I've seen names of some that are regional for Southern Indiana that try to do some of this stuff.
I mean, we're the cooling stations for local people besides Bloomington, so those kinds of things. Yeah, I agree. I was at a news conference in the FID in 2017, and one of the big areas of discussion were who's the reporters, who's generating this news, and what the big push was to have a portal for public input, so that, especially, for instance, during political protests or things, when you have a summary of what happened, and the push was to have the local people that were there, protesting, have their versions, or same could be with police summary, and then have the people that were the victims or whatever have their version and have them put some portal for that. So I guess, I don't know if that's part of the plan, but some way to not just have the same old storytellers.
Well, I mean, one good thing is that we can all be journalists now. I mean, Dan Gilmore and others back in the early aughts saw that happening. Like we're all in a position to do that, and we should be able to employ the same values that are taught in journalism schools, right? And I actually have a lot of hope for that. I think lots more people could be involved in whatever this becomes than just the people who step up. But a weird thing about journalism is it is kind of a calling. Somewhere in the works of Rollo May, which I thought was in this one book that when I looked through it, I couldn't find it, but I believe that he said it, that writers alone, among all creative types, suffer the illusion that the world really needs to hear what they have to say. And I suffer from that myself. I have to write. That's what I do. But that's but I think everybody can step up. I think that's the short answer to that question. Yes, go.
Okay, I have a quick question. I don't know when's the last time you clicked on the Microsoft. I think you're running Linux, so Windows News on the bottom corner of all desktops. And I mean, the news in there is just the most inflammatory, at least for me. My algorithm might be horrible, but the most inflammatory thing humanly possible, just to get you to click on things. And where some browsers are now having news from the left, news from the right, where you can select it, auto filters your news. How do we focus on just the fact-based stories, especially when people can misappropriate facts or incorrectly state facts, and it gets more traction than just the correct facts? How do we focus on those purely fact-based stories, which might be maybe more boring by comparison, but are more important to people?
Well, that's why we're doing this locally. I mean, that's so it'd be kind of cool if in Windows, in the corner of Windows, or in the corner of your Apple OS, or on your Google thing that uses generative AI, whatever it is the local stuff. Because the local stuff is probably going to be fact-based. It's probably going to be more fact-based than whatever you get from the right or the left on stuff. I mean, the national news and international news is really, it's fully corrupted by algorithms at this point. You don't know. I mean, and you can listen to, there's a slide I didn't have here, but it's like the New York Times and NPR and some of the older, as fact-based as possible journalistic organizations will go out of their way to be as fact-based as they can. But for the most part, what you're getting are opinions, and you're getting what algorithms want you to click on. right? Because they want to get your eyeballs in front of advertising. We don't have, we shouldn't, we at least shouldn't have that locally. And so, I mean, it actually gave me a good idea, I think, which is maybe you need a local button there, because at least, even if it's not that interesting to you, you know it's going to be factual. Here's the weather. Here's where the streets are closed. Here's where this other stuff is happening, you know. And here's this large resource of history that if I want to write or talk about it, I can actually go there and find out what's really going on. I hope that helps. Over. Okay.
Thank you, Zach. I was wondering what your position would be on how to weave in social media.
How do I pull the mic in even closer?
Social media, using things like Reddit as an alternative source, is something I've done because of the lack of other reliable sources. Sometimes that fills the void for timely, recent information, or things that also maybe can't easily be covered, even if there is some coverage, it's very surface level. So,
Yeah.
for example, if somebody's pushed out a leadership position at IU, IDS can only do so much. HT may not even get to it. It's not on Dave's spectrum of what he's trying to cover. Things like NCCSC coverage, I was able to find good information.
On Reddit.
Not on, well, on Reddit somewhat, but also on Facebook community groups. Some people use Nextdoor for things. So just wondering how, because those do end up being places where you can actually get news, and like AI, you have to worry about hallucinations or
Right.
But it does fill some gaps. And how can we leverage that?
Yeah, I think I found Reddit quite useful for local stuff. I found Nextdoor much less useful. I have it. There's a loose dog. I mean, that's mostly what it is. And you know, somebody showed up on my front porch. I don't know who they were. I mean, that's mostly what Nextdoor is. But Reddit actually does have stuff, and sometimes there's opinions. Like, I don't know why that guy got fired, but this is what this story. I think the story is about that. I think we're at a very liminal time right now where I think social media is kind of long in the tooth. I was listening to a podcast this morning where Google is being compared to Walmart because you get everything on there, whereas with something like Perplexity or ChatGPT, it's giving you just what you want. It's curating it for you. But like search is long in the tooth, social is long in the tooth. I think an interesting, the short answer I think is they're useful. It's great. Use whatever you can, but it's a little like Mother Jones used to say. You know, you trust your mother, but you cut the cards. You know, you want to read everything with a grain of salt, and there might even be another social media thing called a grain of salt that will just do nothing but look at that. Joyce has thought.
Just do one more then.
One more.
I just wanted to follow up on that a little bit, and that is that we're at the stage where, you know, we all have our new cars and we have to take gas with us and tools and whatever out on the roads because we haven't gotten to the place where, you know, cars just work and there's gas stations everywhere. So some of these tools are getting towards when are we going to get to the gas stations? And what everybody's doing is at this point just aggregating whatever your thing is. But just on the horizon, I want to mention that there is something called content authentication that has been created, a technology, so that you will know this piece of information came from XYZ source. And that's all, like sort of the earliest versions is sort of the check mark on your phone that this is a number that's known to the phone company kind of thing. So we're early on, but there is technology coming that you will know this is either just a random person but a person, or it's not verified at all. And we're just early on with all this stuff that will be very helpful for all these tools.
I'm going to hand it back to Isak now, who's going to wrap it for us, I think.
Well, not necessarily, but I just want to make sure, I know some of you have class and other things to get to, so please join me one more time in thanking Doc. Now, 2 quick announcements, and then we have more time if anybody wants to stay and continue to have a conversation, but I just want to, again, I see a lot of students who I know have class schedules. But two quick announcements. The first one is that this is the beginning of a conversation where, I think there's lots of things still that we, even within today, that we can continue to query and ask about when we're thinking about how we might put some of these things into practice, particularly thinking about the action arena that some of these things take place in. And so please come again. Our next session is on November 19th. It'll also be here. And so please come again. Please take some food with you. And for the rest of you, for those of you who joined us online, thank you so much. We'll also have the recording up on the website fairly soon. And so again, take some food with you. If you want to stay and continue to talk, maybe we can come a little bit closer so those who need to leave can. But thank you again for being with us. We'll see you in November.
Thank you.